From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soyini Gray. Today marks the end of the 10-day deadline given by Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno to his ministers to find Gaucho, the leader of the armed group apparently responsible for violence and kidnappings on the border with Colombia. Moreno also gave Gaucho a deadline to surrender himself. His Olivier Sinistera group is believed to still be holding an Ecuadorian couple as hostages. It was earlier accused of kidnapping and murdering 3 journalists and carrying out a number of bomb attacks in the Esmeraldas province in the north of Ecuador, which killed 4 members of the armed forces. Anguished protesters outside of the presidential palace tried to speak with President Lenin Moreno about the mishandling of the missing journalist case, as well as the case of the kidnapped couple, Oscar Villacis and Kitty Velasco. Relatives of the murdered El Comercio press team kidnapped a month ago near the border with Colombia joined relatives of the kidnapped couple as they reacted to rumors of government resignations and demanded action for the return of the couple.
The exit of 3 ministers, or of 2, or 1, or 10, or the coming of new ministers is not going to revive 3 Ecuadorians. However, I think if they decide to step aside, from my own personal point of view, it's for the better. I think that these are consequences of the things that they did or they failed to do, pointing out the specific errors that the national government made through its official spokesperson.
Today is the deadline which supposedly the president gave Gaucho to surrender. I really doubt he'll do it. What does he think he's doing? The government is not doing anything to rescue my brother and sister-in-law. He's only focused on whether Gaucho is going to turn himself in. He'll never turn himself in.
On Wednesday, the Ecuadorian Interior Minister Cesar Navas signed an agreement with the U.S. Ambassador Todd Chapman to fight organized transnational crime. This will allow U.S. Drug Immigration and Customs Enforcement agencies to work in Ecuador. The agreement also aims to fight money laundering, human trafficking, and weapon smuggling. The U.S. ambassador said this was the right time to develop military and security projects in the country because of ideological differences had been overcome. The heads of central banks of several Latin American countries will meet in Quito, Ecuador for the first time on Friday to analyze regional cooperation in finance. Representatives from 10 countries, including Venezuela and Bolivia, will meet to discuss 2 main topics: financial technology and cybersecurity. The meeting will be held behind closed doors. And Barbados' Prime Minister Frondell Stewart has announced an election day. It's May 24th. Stewart had until June 4th to call the election. Nomination day for candidates is set for Monday, May 7th. This brings to an end months of uncertainty in Barbados. Earlier this week, opposition leader Mia Mottley demanded that he call the elections, saying that he was harming the country. And in her response to the election date, Mottley said she's happy the date has been announced, but she has concerns about the timing. She said election date clashes with exam time.
There will, of course, be some anxiety on the part of parents and on the part of some of the children, and indeed some of the young people who are taking exams, as some of them are also first-time voters. They will have to navigate 2 serious decisions in short order. The Prime Minister and his government therefore need to explain to the country as soon as possible what arrangements will be put in place so as to minimize this anxiety. Anyone who has a child knows what I'm talking about. Those who claim that this is the result of some grand strategy really need to appreciate that this is nothing more than a royal fumble.
United Progressive Party leader Lynette Eastman, who was a member of the BLP but has now formed her own party, says she's excited for the election.
We will have 24 candidates contesting the election. We've started the process, we started our campaign, so we simply continue to roll out our campaign. We've been getting an excellent response, and we believe that we will do well when polling day comes.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has announced he's spoken to the President of Panama by phone and agreed to return the ambassadors, reactivate flights, and install a high-level commission which will present proposals to solve the issues between the two countries. President Nicolas Maduro was speaking at the opening of Expo Venezuela 2018. The four-day event is intended to show off Venezuela's exports to boost production and revive the economy. Maduro pointed to the success of pre-sales of their new cryptocurrency, the Petro, which he said has totaled $3.3 billion.
And we are still standing with our Bolivarian economic plan, with our priority sectors, and with the Petro, which has brought us excellent news. Extraordinary news, I would say. So with all these initiatives, including the food supply mission and the Petro, we are building the strength we need so that after the elections on the 20th of May, we can have great economic revolution of growth, of productivity, and develop a healthy economy. Venezuela needs a healthy economy in trade, in finance, in the currency. We need to build the basis of a new economy.
4 days into Venezuela's electoral campaign, the National Electoral Council has responded to the allegations of irregularities being made by some opposition candidates.
The electoral campaign continues in Venezuela in a satisfactory manner, according to the National Electoral Council. Meanwhile, candidates continue with rallies across the country. Henry Falcón, candidate for the Avanzada Progresista Party, has complained to the CNE that rules on media airtime for each candidate are not being followed. He has asked for sanctions against Nicolás Maduro and has sent a message to the Democratic Unity Roundtable.
Once again, I have had to remind the Democratic Unity Roundtable that now is time for agreements, a time for meetings, a time for decisions that represent the whole country and not just one party.
Sandra Oblitas, vice president of the CNE, has pointed out that 314 prosecutors from all across the country will enforce the rules. She has responded to the criticism from some candidates, assuring them that the CNE have opened investigations into alleged violations.
About the electoral campaign, we want to remind everyone that it strictly belongs to the CNE. Therefore, every authority is subjected to the guidelines from the National Electoral Council.
On the other hand, the candidate from Esperanza por el Cambio party, Javier Bertucci, hasn't ruled out a joint candidacy against Nicolás Maduro. He says he is in talks with Henry Falcón.
We need to sit down and talk about a possible agreement on the elections. It's possible that we may join forces with Henry Falcón.
It is a possible alliance that Falcón himself has not ruled out.
In Paraguay, the Supreme Court of Electoral Justice has decided against an election recount. The opposition candidate, Efrain Alegre, requested the recount, but the court has rejected his call and has declared the Colorado Party candidate, Mario Abdo Benitez, the winner. Our correspondent, Osvaldo Zayas, has more.
Saludos cordiales desde Asunción, la capital paraguaya.
Paraguay's opposition, united in the Ganar Alliance, is demanding transparency regarding the results of the election held on April 22nd. Mario Abdo Benitez won according to the rapid transmission system of the results. However, the Ganar Alliance says the digital voting records, which produced this result, do not match with the original voting records. The opposition is asking for all the electoral records to be checked before they can accept the final result. We need to remember that the candidates, Benitez and Alegre, got the smallest gap in the history of the Paraguayan democracy. Only 3.7% of votes difference between them according to the preliminary results. This is the reason why the opposition says the recounting of votes could change the results of the elections. This isn't just about the president and vice president, but also with the candidates for the legislature of the Chamber of Deputies and Chamber of Senators. 80 seats for the first one and 45 seats for the second one. These seats are disputed. In addition to the 17 regional governments and their parliaments, as well as 18 seats in the parliament of the Mercosur trade bloc, the opposition continues to call for protests in the country, in addition to votes recounting.
Por eso que dicen que este estrecho margen podría ser revertido o por lo menos cambiaría en alguna medida los resultados electorales.
We thank Osvaldo Zayas for that report, and we're going to take a short break. So join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Indigenous people have marched to the National Congress in Brazil, calling the government of Michel Temer illegitimate. I'm sorry, we have another story. In Peru, the Constitutional Court has ruled in favor of the release of the former president Ollanta Humala and his wife Nadine Heredia. They've been accused of receiving money from Odebrecht. The couple were under preventative detention for more than 9 months. They're both accused of money laundering. During Humala's presidential campaign in 2011, top Odebrecht officials have confessed that they paid millions of dollars to Humala to secure future contracts in the country. Now, for more on Humala's release, we go to tell us your correspondent Jaime Herrera in Lima.
Just a few hours ago, the Constitutional Court decided to revoke an order for a preventative prison sentence against former President Ollanta Humala and his wife, Nadine Heredia. The heads of court said it doesn't have anything to do with the accusations against them, but that the procedures to sentence Humala weren't appropriate. They also said that the release of Humala and Heredia must take place immediately. After they published this decision on their website, the National Penitentiary Institute must set them free. Outside the court, a group of supporters from the Nationalist Party celebrated the results, and President Martín Vizcarra said that the government will respect the decision of the court and the National Power Division.
A public prosecutor in Peru has accused the former president, Alberto Fujimori, and 3 former ministers of carrying out forced sterilizations during his administration. Prosecutor Luis Landa said Fujimori should be prosecuted as he was aware of the practice and allowed it to continue. Now, women have been demanding justice for the victims of forced sterilizations, including at a protest in 2015 when demonstrators were tear-gassed by police. According to official data, over 270,000 tubal ligament surgeries and 22,000 vasectomies were performed in Peru between 1996 and 2001. They were almost entirely performed on poor Quechua-speaking rural people. It is impossible to know exactly how many were carried out under coercion. Mexico's state prosecutor has said a local rapper has confessed to disposing of the bodies of three murdered students by dissolving their corpses in acid. Investigators say the rapper told them this is not the first time he has disposed of bodies in this way for the New Generation Jalisco cartel. He's in custody and he will be charged with aggravated kidnapping. Some of the families of the students and their supporters say they do not believe the official version of what has happened, and they argue the murders could be used to influence the outcome of the elections in July. The Guatemalan Special Forces have been sent to the border area near Belize. The order comes a week after a national referendum allowed the government to refer to the border issue to the International Court of Justice. Guatemala claims that it owns half of the territory of its neighbor Belize. The border dispute between the countries dates back to the 18th century. In December 2008, both countries signed a deal that inhabitants could vote to decide whether the territorial claim should be decided by the ICJ. While Guatemala held its referendum on Sunday, Belize has not yet set the date for its referendum.
En blanco tenemos 93.
Welcome back. The European Union Special Envoy for the Peace Process in Colombia, Eamon Gilmore, will visit the FARC leader Jesus Santrich in prison. Santrich is on a hunger strike after being arrested 2 weeks ago at the request of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. He's reported to be in very bad health. The visit was announced by the FARC's former presidential candidate.
We have the commitment of the Special Envoy from the European Union to visit our comrade Santrich in prison. Through him, I have sent him a message. We are very optimistic. We are positive this is the right way to work together with everyone who made the agreements possible. With the Colombian people who know the path that we have to take for Colombia is the one of peace. We are going to continue working for peace and avoiding those who want the agreements to fail.
Nearly 3 decades have passed since the massacre of Trujillo, a series of murders perpetuated by paramilitary groups between 1988 and 1994 in the Cuenca Valley in Colombia. Survivors continue to fight against impunity and demand that the government guarantee their safety.
With great pain, the survivors of Trujillo remember their murdered relatives and condemn Colombia's government for failing to provide guarantees that would protect their lives.
In 2013, paramilitary groups, along with certain people who do not want this memorial to stand, they wrote threatening graffitis saying that it would kill us if we didn't leave.
The government had compromised to provide reparations, but in fact, it has done very little.
This process has been extremely limited by the state's policies, especially for those of us who've been affected by the levels of violence here in Trujillo.
En contexto son años 98, 94.
The lawyer for the survivors says they have faced many different judicial problems.
The main problem has been lack of collaboration from the government to identify members from the public force who participated in the massacre. Initially, we were told 1 battalion took part in the massacres, but much later we discovered it was actually 3 different battalions that were behind this operation.
Those who witnessed the massacre have continued to work so that younger generations can live in peace.
We were horribly affected by violence, and now we desperately want peace. Colombia deserves real peace.
From the Peace and Reconciliation Memorial Center, the survivors of Trujillo continue to ask the Colombian government for guarantees for truth, peace, justice, and reparations.
Tatiana Portela, Telesur, Bogotá, Colombia.
Now, while he does not yet have actual figures, Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister says hundreds of English persons of Trinidadian origin were possibly affected by the Windrush scandal.
Now back in Trinidad, after attending the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in London, Dr. Rowley told journalists that as the Windrush scandal unfolded, they discovered that Trinidadian nationals had been affected and even deported.
And this went under the radar until it came to the High Commission not too long ago. And the High Commission, I met one such person on Monday night who was quite grateful for the assistance that she had received from our mission in London when she faced that issue before it became an international embarrassment.
Prime Minister Rowley says the various Caribbean heads of Commonwealth were assured that the situation would be resolved, and that included the issue of compensation for those affected. In explaining why the issue was so important, he said that it was not just the persons whose right to remain in the UK that were being affected, but their families as well.
This thing worked its way all the way from welcome, come and help, to go home. And government policy changed along the way, and that is why political parties in Britain are now pointing fingers at each other. And interestingly enough, the chairman of this CHOGM happens to have been the Home Secretary, who had a serious role to play in what the outcome was. So we found ourselves in a situation where we had to be very diplomatic, but be very firm in treating with this matter.
Dr. Rowley says that this situation will take some time to be resolved, but it is one that the region will be monitoring.
Indigenous people have marched to the National Congress in Brazil, calling the government of Michel Temer illegitimate and denouncing his record on indigenous rights. Mia Alberti reports from Brasilia.
Enough genocide reads the banner being taken to the National Congress in Brasilia. The indigenous people of the country accuse President Michel Temer of forgetting about their rights.
We are here to tell this illegitimate government enough of unfairness. We're here resisting to survive. And the red you see here, it's turned to blood with this Congress, with the killing of many indigenous leaders.
In fact, President Michel Temer has the worst record on indigenous land demarcation. His predecessors signed dozens of laws marking indigenous land. So far, Temer has signed 0. Former Attorney General Deborah Duprat says the problem is institutionalized racism.
They are victims of the judiciary and are not well informed. It takes a long time to recognize their rights and comes with obstacles, all under the argument of poverty, misery. All of that is racism.
This year's presidential elections have a new face, Sonia Guajajara, from the Guajajara people. She's the first indigenous person and woman to run for the vice presidency.
We're here to create a resistance to change this economic and political system that doesn't represent its people.
1 kilometer long of red ink, in this case representing blood, the blood of the hundreds of indigenous people who have died in Brazil in the last couple of years. This will be the reminders of this year's march towards the National Congress and this year's Free Land Camp. Mia Alberti in Brasilia.
Teachers in Denver, Colorado are the latest educators in the United States to walk out of the classrooms in protest. The teachers say it's not a strike but a rally. They're looking for more funding for the education sector. Schools are underfunded by $822 million. It not only affects salaries, some districts have implemented 4-day weeks, increased student fees, and cut the number of teachers while increasing class sizes. Thousands of people have been protesting across Spain after a court failed to convict 5 men on rape charges for an attack on a young woman during a bullfighting festival in 2016. Angry demonstrators packed central Madrid and other cities, shouting shame and no means no. The 5 men were jailed for 9 years for sexual assault, but many saw the sentences as too lenient. Under Spanish law, the charge of sexual abuse differs from rape in that it does not involve violence or intimidation. And now we're going to take a look at more protests in Spain and other stories making headlines across the world.
The Catalonian Student Union took to the streets of Barcelona on Tuesday to criticize the rising cost of education and demand the repeal of Article 155, which placed the region under direct rule from Madrid.
We believe that education has to be the pillar and the backbone that holds the Catalan Republic. We understand that we have to reverse those neoliberal and privatization policies that have been created over the past years.
Heavy rains over the last 24 hours has blocked roads and disrupted traffic in the city of Cape Town, South Africa. Authorities say that 578 structures and about 2,000 people have been affected by flooding. Now, South Africa has declared a national disaster over drought, affecting the southern and western regions, which had the driest years ever recorded in 2015 and 2016. U.S. comedian Bill Cosby has been found guilty of 3 counts of sexual assault, each of which carries a potential 10 years in prison. The actor has been on trial for drugging and assaulting ex-basketball player Andrea Cosstand in 2004. Around 60 women over 5 decades have publicly accused Cosby of being a sexual predator, but statute of limitation laws mean that only 1 charge has been brought to trial.
The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has left Pyongyang for his summit with the South Korean President Moon Jae-in. North Korean media have reported they will meet at the Peace House on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom. It will be the first time a North Korean leader crosses into South Korean territory since the end of the Korean War in 1953. Both leaders are expected to talk about North Korea's nuclear and missile technology and inter-Korean relations. And that story has taken us to the end of this news brief, but for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sonia Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
The Pakistani journal